And tonight we are looking at, we're having a conversation for those who fight for the voiceless, and we'll be discussing if there can be unity in today's divided world.
And I'm Serene.
And I'm Gemma.
And we'll be your hosts this evening. So first, as people are just joining, we're just going to be asking each other some questions. But you're in the right place if you're here. So
our questions are actually from the conversation deck, which are in the big conversation goodie bags. So if you've got your goodie bag, feel free to join us and rifle through the cards to find the right one.
And if you haven't got your goodie bag yet, or you haven't signed up, then that's okay. You can still sign up if you go to suku.uk/TBC, and then you can sign up and get your goodie bag and join in with all the fun.
Yeah, and you don't just have to be in Southampton. We are still posting them. So yeah, do sign up and grab your conversation deck. So, Serene,
yeah,
I've gone for the Two of Hearts first.
Two of Hearts, wonderful. What's the question?
If you could learn a new activity, what would it be?
A new activity? Okay, do you know what I've always wanted to actually do? I've always wanted to do surfing. I think that'd be so fun.
Yeah, no, that is fun. But I feel like you only need to be able to surf if you live by the beach.
Yeah, but then on the occasions when you do go to the beach, you can then whip out these mad skills, and then people will be like, whoa.
It is an impressive one, for sure.
Yeah. What would your skill be?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be able to play the guitar. It's one of those classic things where in first lockdown, I was like, yeah, I'm going to play the guitar every day. I still can't do it. So
no worries. We're in many more lockdowns probably. So.
Hopefully I'll pick that up at some point.
Yeah, so again, just if you're just joining on now, you're very welcome. Do be commenting in the chat what your skill, what was it?
Yeah, your skill. Your new
activity you'd like to take up. But yeah, you're in the right place.
And we're so happy to have you with us.
Yeah. So next question, I've got one for you, Gemma.
Okay.
Number 10. Boris is dead. What is the best supermarket meal deal that you would go for?
Okay, I think a bit of a controversial opinion. I go for a pasta pot.
Yeah, that is so controversial. Like, what?
I think if you go to Tesco's and you get the tomato and feta pasta pot, then you've got it right.
No.
Yeah, and then got to go for a bag of crisps. Not a bag of chocolate bar.
No.
And, you've got to make the most of a meal deal. Get the most expensive snacks to then be saving the most money. So I'd go for the, kettle chips or whatever the fanciest crisps are. And then... I mean, part of me wants to get a smoothie just to really maximise it. But then I would enjoy an iced tea way more. Or like an Oasis.
Oh, interesting.
Why? What would you go for?
Yeah, see, it's tricky because my go-to meal deal would... I can't eat because I'm a veggie. So I would go for the chicken stuffing thing with the 3 sandwiches because that just looks so good. And then with some prawn cocktail crisps. But as a veggie, I'd go for an egg make sandwich. Can't go wrong.
That's quite tragic.
But yeah, there we go.
Be letting us know down in the chat what your meal deal would be.
Yeah, if you've now just joined on, you are so welcome. We'll be discussing having a conversation for those who fight for the voiceless. So you're in the right place.
If there can be unity in today's divided world.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. This is
the Two of
Spades, if you're playing along. What breaks your heart? It's a bit of a deeper one.
Yeah, this is one, flowing into tonight. What breaks my heart? Yeah, such a good question. I think for me, genuinely, it's seeing women who are in very vulnerable positions being abused and taken advantage of. So with female genital mutilation, forced marriages and sex trafficking and all that. What breaks your heart, Gemma?
I think just seeing how broken the world is today is obviously very heartbreaking, but especially the refugee situation and people not having a home. I find that really hard to watch.
Yeah.
And yeah, that does link to our talk tonight. We'll be talking about unity. Fighting for the voiceless. And yeah, you'll probably be quite happy to hear it's not actually Serena and I giving us our talk this evening. We're being joined by Michael Otts now.
And he'll be introducing us to our special guest
a little bit later. But Michael, how are you?
Hey guys. I'm well, thank you. Good to be with you.
Good to have you here.
Nice to have you. For those who may not have been here this week, do you mind telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yep, so I'm still Michael Otts. In Mayo in Buckinghamshire, which is about halfway between Oxford and London. And I have the real joy and privilege of speaking at events organised by university Christian unions, both here in the UK, also in other parts of Europe and beyond as well. So normally travelling, but this year lots of being in my spare room in front of the computer.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Do you mind if we ask you one of our questions really quickly?
Go for it.
Okay, what is the best supermarket meal deal in your opinion?
The all-important question.
Very important. I think I'm going to sound really posh if I say it's the M&S, dine out for two for £12.
Oh wow, very fun.
I'm
nice.
Guessing that's not the average student meal deal. So that's because we live in Marlow, and Marlow's we've discovered quite posh.
Okay.
So that's like what commoners eat in Marlow, the M&S.
Wow. Living the high life.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Michael, it's over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys, so much. Yes, the M&S meal deal, whatever meal deal. I was thinking actually, a bit like what you were saying earlier, my best meal deal, if I go, I always just don't pick what I want, pick what's most expensive.
For
The
sure.
kind of frugal nature of me just thinks I'll go for the really expensive smoothie just because I get more. I don't even like it, but it's Anyway, yes, thank you. Great. Well, I am now going to introduce our special guest for this evening. Each evening this week, we are inviting a different special guest to speak on a different topic that we're having a conversation about. And tonight I'm joined by Clare Williams, who hopefully will appear next to me now. Clare, there you are.
Hello, hi Michael.
How are you doing, Clare?
I'm really good, thank you. Yeah, I've just been laughing at these discussions about meal deals and thinking I need to take notes.
Well, I was going to ask you actually, first off, meal deal, what's your favourite?
I have to say, depending on if I have company, I will go for a chicken and sweet corn sandwich. But if I don't have company and I can really relax, I'll have a cheese and onion sandwich.
It's really funny actually you say that, because on the way back we've had to head out this afternoon, and we went past Burger King. So my wife and I, we popped into Burger King, and she got me these onion rings, and I'm like, I've got to give a talk later, why have you got me onion rings? I was like, oh no, I'm online, it's safe, I can eat onion rings at once. So great. So Clare, tell us where you're based and what do you do?
Sure. So I actually grew up in London. You'll hear my London twang coming through. But I actually now live in in Tadley near Reading with my mum. I work in Oxford, but obviously offices are closed, so I actually just work from home now. So yeah.
Yeah. So the joys of working from home.
Oh my gosh, living at work. That's what it is.
What's the best and worst thing about living and working from home?
The best thing is that you can do some work in your onesie sometimes. And I guess the worst thing is, I don't know, just constant Zooms really, and just feeling kind of a bit away from your team. There's some things that, just relationships in the team it's a little bit difficult. Yeah.
I have given a lot of talks in universities around the world wearing my slippers and my pajama bottoms. It's amazing. It's so good. Whatever I wear from up here, it's all you need to know. I'm not actually tonight. You'll be glad to know. Not that you need to know what. Anyway.
Thank you for that information.
Yeah. So from the sublime to the slightly more serious, we're thinking obviously tonight about division, think about our worlds being divided, and think about what hope there might be in a divided world. Obviously 2020 was a huge year in all sorts of ways, obviously because of COVID, but I guess how, in your opinion, has 2020 kind of highlighted how divided our world is? What was your experience of it, and what was your take on it?
Yeah, I think all of us will probably refer to the pandemic, really. And for me, I think, knowing that the pandemic and the coronavirus was disproportionately killing people from the BAME community was quite difficult to just, I guess, navigate. And then compounding that, the idea of, a respiratory disease, then hearing the words of George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," in that incident in May when he was killed by a police officer. I just think that it was just compounding grief for many of us.
Yeah. And how did you, like, I guess just emotionally, how did that feel, like watching on as all this is going on in the world? How did that feel for you?
Yeah, I just think just feel really powerless and just moved. I think you wouldn't. I think if you don't look at those incidents and aren't moved, I think, that would go think that something might be wrong. I think it's in our nature. Nature, I believe, that is given to us by God to be moved by such things and try to do what we can to help.
Yeah. So you obviously mentioned God there. You are a Christian. It's obviously a foundational thing to your life. I guess looking on at the growing awareness maybe that many people now have of kind of racial divisions and how that plays out in society, how does being a Christian give you hope as you look at that situation, and if so, how?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because I think sometimes people think, oh, there's some sort of cognitive dissonance going on with you. How can you be a Christian? How can you be a Black woman and be a Christian, given a lot of what we know about the past and also the present? But actually, what gives me hope in my Christian faith, I'll say two things. I think Christianity gives a place for lament, gives a place to grieve. And I remember actually when the events of 2020 were going on around the summertime, especially, just reading through the book of Psalms. Psalms is a book of poetry in the Bible, and there are so many Psalms which are just prayers of lament, and that for me shows me that I don't have to be strong, and that the God of the Bible actually dignifies my grief and allows me to be sorrowful, because that's the action that we should be having. So that's one piece of it. And I think the second is I think Christianity gives me hope because it makes sense of my sort of moral outrage when I kind of investigate and question, okay, so I'm angry about this, as I should be. Where do I ground that anger? Where do I ground that sense of morality? And, if the world came into existence for nothing, by nothing, then I think it's Adam Coleman, he's a guy from the True ID podcast. He says, if the world came into existence for nothing, by nothing, then nothingness cannot confer value or meaning on people. Whereas if the world did come into existence by God, who has given us inherent human dignity because we're created in his image, then when things do go wrong, my moral outrage is grounded. I know that sounds quite philosophical, but actually when I bring the deepest questions of my heart, when I bring the deepest sorrows of my heart or the deepest anger, that is actually makes more sense to me. I think the Christian world has greater explanatory power.
That's helpful. If I could play devil's advocate and push back on that. So if someone were to say to you, yeah, but actually a lot of people speaking up about racial division, they're not Christian. Some of them are atheists. They don't believe in God. So they don't have that framework. They don't have that worldview. And yet they still seem to think that this is a really big issue. So clearly, it's not really necessary to have the Christian worldview. There are plenty of people who don't have it and still care about it.
Absolutely. And I think the kind of, I guess, caveat to that argument which I've just relayed is that for us to know morality, we don't have to believe in God, but it would make more sense that God does exist. And so this is not for me to say that my atheist friends, family, associates, colleagues, whoever, are not capable of goodness. And I think, the lockdown and the kind of the response that we've all had from all faiths and none, in caring for the most vulnerable, shows that everyone is capable of kindness and goodness. But my question would be, where is that grounded? Where can that make the most sense? And I think the Christian worldview does that for me.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks for clarifying. So you say that your Christian worldview does make sense of how you look at the world, it seems to give them the strongest and fullest explanation for that. And in the Bible, it gives voice as well to the feelings that you have, the feelings of outrage and anger. And you see, you said reflected in the Bible, like in the book of Psalms, these songs that are actually expressions of people's anger and injustice in the world. Like, actually, we see that right there in the pages of the Bible. But I guess for a lot of people, like, we don't necessarily read the Bible, but we do see the church. We do see, like, the church's records through history. We see the way that purported Christians operate, like both here in the UK and maybe especially as we look across to America as well often. And when we look at all of that, I guess that doesn't seem to always tally with what you've just said. The church hasn't always been at the forefront, has it? Sometimes it seems to have been complicit in racial division. So as a Christian, how do you then respond when you see the church not so much being the answer, but seemingly part of the problem?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think that's where maybe questions will come my way, sort of the cognitive dissonance. Are you, is something quite wrong with you because you claim to be a Christian? But I think the first thing to say would be that my decision to be a Christian is because I believe that I have a relationship with Jesus. And at the center of the faith isn't the invitation of Christianity, isn't an invitation to the institution of the church. The invitation to Christianity is the invitation to a person, Jesus Christ. When I look at the person of Jesus Christ, I see someone who was an he was a ethnic minority that was persecuted, through history. We can see that Jesus was born in a poor area. Jesus was, criminalized by the state. He was executed. All sorts of parallels, I would say, to the lives, unfortunately, of ethnic minorities around the world. And for me, the God of the Bible coming into sort of the human experience through the person of Jesus Christ speaks volumes to me. And so my hope, I guess, and my faith in Jesus, the person at the center of the faith, gives me hope. But also, I do think the church does have some things to answer for. And for instance, we all know about the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade and some of the church's complicity in that. But I also think that I know a lot of people will say, well, what about Wilberforce? And Wilberforce definitely was great. Also, someone like Granville Sharp. But I also think there were Black voices, abolitionists who used to be enslaved people, and they were Christian, and they were able to critique the horrors of slavery, and they were able to speak about it because they were Christian. So I think added to our sort of defense of people like Wilberforce and Granville Sharp, we need to remember voices like Olaudah Equiano. We need to remember voices like Mary Prince, Frederick Douglass, these Christian formerly enslaved Black people, abolitionists, who were able to talk and critically engage with the Bible and say that this is actually wrong.
Absolutely. That's really helpful. And I guess one of the things we look at when we look back through history is, like we said, Christians who really stood against that, as well as Christians who were complicit in it. And I guess what we're trying to say is, when you start to look at Jesus, you start to look at the kind of the whole message of the Bible, you then have to say, well, who was actually most consistently living out and expressing what that message is all about? And actually, we want to say, as you start to look at Jesus particularly and what that looks like, you start to say, well, actually, if people were to really live that out, that would be quite radical. And it has been radical in history. Yeah. Sadly, reality is, and today, it's quite easy to claim to follow Christ and yet actually not reflect anything of his life or teaching in the way that you teach or live. One last question for now, but as Claire's already said, do be sending your questions in, and we're going to have 20 minutes of questions, an extended Zoom question time if you want for later. So there'll be loads of time for questions later, but just one more for now, and that is, if the people tonight who basically have been hurt because of what they've experienced of kind of Christians and their response to them personally, or what they've perceived of the church in this area, or maybe in other areas too, like, what would you want to say to them tonight?
The first thing I would say is sorry. I think you don't deserve to be treated that way. That's not what I see when I read about the God of the Bible and the person of Jesus Christ. So I'm really, really sorry. And I just want to affirm as well that anger that you feel about it, because I think that anger would actually point us to someone greater.
Great. So are you still there, Claire?
I'm here. Sorry, I can see that my
it broke up for a second, and I was like, "Oh, was that? Were you about to say something else, or were you ending?" So sorry. Did you want to?
I was just saying. Hopefully, I won't get cut out again. I was just saying that I affirm the anger that any of our listeners or anyone watching might be feeling about the way that they've been treated unfairly by the church, particularly with regards to racial injustice, because I think that anger actually points to someone greater, to someone who dignifies our feelings and dignifies us in our suffering and listens to us in that. So I would encourage you to explore kind of a little bit what I was talking about, kind of the philosophical foundations of our morality. And I would encourage you to explore where that might lead. And I think you might find it lead you to God.
Brilliant. Claire, thank you so much for what you've shared already. You're going to be sticking around. We'll be joining you again a little bit later. Before we think about this whole topic of division a little bit more in a minute, we're going to have a short break. There's going to be some music. And so that will give us a chance to reflect on what we've already heard and to think about our response to that.
Hi, I'm Julia. It's great to be with you this evening for the big conversation. Hope you've been enjoying your conversations, and we're going to take a quick music break. Have you grown tired? Feeling alone, numb to the earth, numb to the soul. Eyes wide open, unafraid to be alive. You're living, you're breathing. Feels like the very first time. You make your way through the valley of your soul, coming home to the truth about the world. Everyone is hurting, everyone is searching, everyone is looking for the truth about love, for the truth about, for the truth about the world. Everyone is hurting, everyone is searching, everyone is looking for the truth about love, for the truth about, for the truth about the world. Everyone is hurting, everyone is searching, everyone is looking for the truth about love, for the truth about, for the truth about the world. Yeah. Everyone is hurting, everyone is searching, everyone is looking for the truth about love, for the truth about, for the truth about the world. Everyone is hurting, searching, everyone is looking for the truth about love, for the truth about, for the truth about the world.
Hi, my name is Megan and I'm going to share with you a piece of my testimony. I've always been a Christian and believed in God, but my independence in faith started when I went to Tanzania in 2018. I, along with a group from my church, went to an orphanage there and helped out in the village. We got to visit all the churches and saw how faithful people were in that God would provide for them with everything that they needed. I also started to independently and actively read my Bible each day, along with a passage from the Our Daily Bread book. I would sometimes share these passages with my friends, and we had faith discussions as a group. When I came home, my experience in Tanzania set me on a journey that led me to get baptised in Easter before coming to university. This year was challenging in the worries of passing A-levels and getting into university, but God was with me through it all. My independence in faith started in Tanzania and led me right up to coming to university and getting involved in the Christian Union. God loves everyone and provides for us all, just like he provided for those in Tanzania and for me in coming to university. I'll now read Matthew 6, 25-26. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Andy, for that. Wasn't that a beautiful song? What a lovely picture of this picture of love and harmony in the midst of bombed out conflict and hostility. What a beautiful picture. Well, we've already thought a lot tonight, haven't we, about this topic of division. And as I said earlier, we'll be having a time for questions at the end. Please do go to the Slido and you can write your questions down. And you can also vote on other people's questions. So if you can't think of a question, check out what other people are asking, vote the good ones up. I'm afraid you can't vote the bad ones down, but you can think of a better question and put that in, and hopefully other people will vote on yours. And we'll be looking at some of those just a little bit later on this evening. But we're thinking tonight about how divided our world is. And it doesn't take a rocket science to realize that actually over the last couple of years particularly, we seem to be living in an increasingly divided world. We see increasing hostility. And it seems like so often we're forced into taking sides on all sorts of different issues, whether it's Brexit or Scottish independence or the American election, even though we're not necessarily American. We're forced to take sides when it comes to how we should deal with huge issues like the environment or racism. And when we see this division and hostility, we see it played out not just verbally or on social media, but sadly sometimes we see it played out in terms of real violence on our streets and sometimes on campuses, particularly in the US. And this hostility, this division has been noticed by people on each side of the political divide, as it were. Douglas Murray, a right-wing conservative commentator, talks about it in his book, The Madness of Crowds. But Jonathan Haidt, a secular left-wing psychologist, also talks about it in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind. He sees that increasingly in our society, we've become divided and hostile and polarized in our reactions to all sorts of different things. Now, why is that the case? Why is it that we seem to be living in an increasingly hostile and polarized world? Well, one answer that people have often suggested has been our increased use of the internet. And if 2020 has done anything, it's certainly increased our use of the internet. So much of our communication happens on it. Now, here's the problem. So much of our communication on social media, be it Facebook or Twitter or whatever it might be, forces us into groups that are quite similar to ourselves and stops us so often from interacting with people who are not like ourselves. The way that social media algorithms often work is to suggest stuff that they think we might already like and to not suggest, of course, stuff that we won't like. But as one person observed, what they therefore do is help us to create echo chambers of our own making. We create a world where we hear our own ideas and beliefs reflected back to us, and we're protected from ever hearing or interacting with alternative ideas or alternative beliefs. So we become ingrained, thinking that everyone must think the way that I think about a particular issue or situation. But I think it would be too easy, wouldn't it, to simply blame the internet for all of our problems. I think it might have exacerbated them, but maybe there's a philosophical reason behind them, as we were thinking earlier. I mentioned that book by Jonathan Haidt, The Coddling of the American Mind. It's a really fascinating book. And in it, he's seeking to try and show what might be the root cause to some of the problems that we see, particularly in Western culture today. And in particular, he talks about 3 untruths that people have bought into, maybe consciously or perhaps more likely unconsciously. He talks about the untruth of fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Secondly, the untruth of emotional reasoning. Always trust your feelings. But it's the third one that I found particularly interesting, especially in relation to what we're thinking about tonight. And it's this: the untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. Now, in saying that, Jonathan Haidt is not denying the reality of the fact that there is good and evil. He completely accepts that. But he's challenging the simplistic division of the world that says that there are some people who are good and there are other people who are evil. As if we could divide the world simplistically in that kind of way into those kind of categories. But he says that's really dangerous. For a start, we generally think that we're in the good category, don't we? So we generally like to think highly of ourselves. And if the world is to become a better place, we assume that it needs to become a bit more like us. But here's the danger. We're then tempted to think less highly of others, to think the worst of those with which we disagree, who we oppose, ideologically or philosophically. and to assume the worst motives for anything that they might do or say. And so we describe them as fascist or Marxist or racist or transphobe or whatever it might be. It's dangerous when we start to divide the world in that way. Why? Because maybe life is more complex. Jonathan Haidt, in his book, at the beginning of that chapter, quotes a Russian author, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote an incredible work called The Gulag Archipelago. I can't claim I've read it, but I've listened to the audio version, the abridged audio version, I admit, and that still took 24 hours of listening, which was quite long enough. But it's a dramatic and harrowing read because he describes his experiences in the Soviet Gulag. The Soviet Gulag was the kind of Soviet version of the Nazi concentration camp. You see, the Soviet system liked to divide the world into good and evil. And certain groups, classes, segments of society were seen as the problem. They needed to be eradicated. They needed to be removed. And very often they were either killed or forcibly taken, like Solzhenitsyn was, to the Gulag, to Siberia. And many of them died. It's quite personal to me because my own great-grandparents died in that experience. And it would have been very easy for Solzhenitsyn, as he suffered horrific evils in the Gulag, to say, you know, the problem with the world is basically the people who put me in here. They are the problem, and I am the answer. But what makes his book so profound is that Solzhenitsyn doesn't do that. In fact, he says something quite the opposite. He says this. He says, so let the reader who expects this book to be a political expose slam its covers shut right now. And then he continues and he says, if only it was so simple, if only there were evil people insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But he says the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? He says it's far too simplistic to say the people out there are evil and everyone needs to be more like me. In fact, he concludes this section by saying this: confronted by the pit into which we are about to toss those who have done us harm, we halt, stricken dumb. It is, after all, only because of the way things worked out that they were the executioners and we weren't. That's really profound, isn't it? Solzhenitsyn is saying maybe we need to search our own hearts to recognize that the evils that we see out there could sometimes potentially be also present in here. Now, actually, Solzhenitsyn, in those words, was really echoing an idea that had already been around for 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years. He was echoing actually some words that were spoken by Jesus. So I want to just read them to you briefly this evening. They come in Mark's account of the life of Jesus. And Mark is recording an encounter that Jesus had with a group of people called the Pharisees. That's significant because these would have been highly respected religious leaders of his day, who made a great show of trying to impress people by their own moral goodness. And one of the ways they did that was by looking down on the moral inferiority of other people. They were very concerned about representing a good external show, and they would quite quickly publicly shame or cancel anyone who didn't live up to their standards or expectations. And in this encounter, Jesus has just exposed actually that they are just as bad as the people, in fact potentially worse than the people that they're pointing the finger at. And he exposes some of the hypocrisy in their own lives. But then he concludes it by saying this in Mark chapter 7, if you want to look it up later online or in your Bible if you have one. Jesus said this. He said, "Are you so dull? Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from outside that can defile them? For it doesn't go into the heart, but into the stomach and then out of the body." But then he went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them. It is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, and arrogance and folly. All these evil come from inside a person and defile them. Jesus' words are incredibly challenging, aren't they? Because he says, actually, where is the source of evil in the world? He says, not like George Bush a few years ago in his State of the Union address, an axis of evil, a certain part of the world, certain nations. He says, no, the axis of evil is actually the center of the human person, the human heart, yours and mine. But actually, we recognize, don't we, that it's hard so often to face up to our own failings. It's much easier to point the finger at the failings of others. It's much easier to do that. Let me give you 2 examples of how that's the case. Martin Lewis, you remember the money-saving expert guy? Apparently he's Britain's #1 most trusted man. Okay, so this must be true. Okay, he's Britain's #1 most trusted man. But Martin Lewis did a survey on Twitter a couple of years ago, and he asked people, do you think that people in Britain today are generally decent and honest? Okay. And the vast majority, I think it was 96% of people said no, okay? We don't believe that people in Britain are generally decent and honest. And then he asked a second question. He said, do you think that you are generally a decent and honest person? And almost a similar percentage of people said yes, they thought they were. And Martin Lewis's response to this was very interesting. He said, either we're overestimating our own moral goodness or we're underestimating it in others. It's profound, isn't it? Give you another example. Just last week, I noticed a YouGov poll that had come out, and it had basically been asking people about how they thought people had responded to this third period of lockdown, and whether people were taking this lockdown as seriously as the first one. And 69% of people surveyed said, yes, we are taking this lockdown as seriously as lockdown #1. But interestingly, 76% of people said that other people were not taking this lockdown as seriously as the first one. In other words, what is the problem with our country? It's not me, it's them. We're so tempted to do that, aren't we? We're so tempted to point the finger. And Jesus says, before we point the finger, maybe we need to look in. Maybe we need to look at our own lives and say, could the problems that we see out there also be found in here? But why is it so hard to do that? Why is it hard to confront the problems in our own hearts? I guess it's always been hard, but I think there is something about our culture in the West today that makes it especially hard. You see, we live in a culture that speaks a lot about tolerance, but actually a culture that doesn't speak a great deal about forgiveness. So actually, we live in a culture where things that we might have said 10 or 20 years ago can be brought up in evidence against us. It can stop us from getting a job. It can get us thrown out of university, potentially. It could mean that we could struggle to even have a career. We live in a culture where there's often very little forgiveness for things that we might have done or said. And if we live in that kind of society, of course you're not going to admit your failings. Why would I admit my failings when people are queuing up to cancel me, no platform me or judge me, publicly shame me? But here's the beautiful thing about Jesus. Jesus comes and yes, he points the problem at my heart and yours. But he didn't come, as one person said, to rub it in. He came to rub it out. He didn't come, in Jesus' words, to condemn, but to save. Jesus says, yes, there is a problem in all of our hearts that leads to division and hostility. We can all cause conflict, and yet I have come to bring forgiveness. And that forgiveness that Jesus brings is costly. He would go to a cross, and on that cross he would die, taking upon himself the ultimate causes and consequences of the world's division and hostility upon himself. He would experience hostility from those around him, but ultimately he would take the ultimate justice and judgment of God so that we might not have to, so that we could be forgiven. And Jesus wants to offer that freely to us. And can I say, in the culture of forgiveness, it becomes much easier, or maybe even just a little bit easier, to admit our own failings. Because we know that actually we have a God who's not standing there to judge, to condemn, to reject, but a God who's standing there willing to forgive and also willing to transform and to change. Because when we've experienced that forgiveness of Jesus, it can change us. It can change us from the inside out. I've just been reading recently a biography of John Newton. John Newton, famous for writing probably the most famous Christian song of the last couple of 100 years, a song called Amazing Grace. But John Newton also, who for much of his life was very actively involved in that horrific slave trade. dramatically came to faith in Jesus. And as he discovered more of Jesus and more of the Bible, he discovered more of how horrific that trade that he had been involved in was. And ultimately, he ended up supporting that process by which ultimately it became outlawed in this country. His heart was changed by the grace of Jesus. And then because his heart had been changed by this offer of forgiveness, he wanted to become an instrument of change, challenging the injustice of our world, challenging structures that are evil, and seeking to bring about change as a result. That's what the Christian faith can do. It changes our hearts, and then it commissions us to go and change the world for good. It's a beautiful thing to be part of. So as I wrap up, before we go to questions, I don't know what you might think about what I've shared tonight. Maybe you're not at all convinced by what we've talked about. Maybe you're not convinced that there's any objective basis to this Christian faith. And if that's you, we'd really want to invite you to look into it, because we think it's really important. We think it really has massive implications for every area of life, as we're trying to demonstrate this week. So why not look into it more? Why not take one of those biographical accounts of the life of Jesus and read it for yourself and investigate these claims and ask yourself whether it could be true, because it could have a massive impact for you and for the way you view the world. Maybe you'll be interested in finding out more, and we'll tell you at the end about a wonderful course called Just Looking that's going to be starting very soon, organised by the CU in Southampton, where you can kind of just look into this more for yourself, to ask questions, to work out what this looks like for yourself. Or maybe actually what you've heard tonight resonates with you and you have a sense that actually this could well be true. That actually the problem isn't just out there, but actually we're honest enough to admit that there might be a problem in here. I might need forgiveness, that you might need it. But if there really is a God who's shown himself in Jesus, who's willing to forgive you, accept you, and wants to come into your life to help change you, you would like that. Well, why not tonight invite this God, this Jesus, to come into your life? Why not invite him to come to clean it up, to forgive you? Why not invite him to come into your life so that you might live in relationship with him on the adventure of faith, as he commissions you to become that agent of change and good in the world that he's created? If you do that, we'd love to let you know how we can help you. And again, do get in touch at the end. But I'm going to hand back to our hosts now for a few moments, and then we're going to be having, after a time of discussion, some questions a little bit later on.
Thank you so much for those talks, Michael and Claire. Yeah, it's so helpful to hear your guys' just wisdom on all that we're thinking about this evening. Claire, such a great reminder that everyone is capable of kindness.
Yeah, and I really liked what you said about the God of the Bible coming into the world through Jesus, the fact that he suffered persecution and actually he's the centre of it, who we can have a relationship with. I thought that was a really helpful point to be reminded of.
Yeah, and Michael, I just loved what you were saying about how Jesus points to the problem, but then he takes that problem away and he came to save and rub out that problem.
Yeah, and I like the little Martin Lewis fact about how we are either overestimating our own moral goodness or underestimating it in others. That was funny.
Yeah, so we're going to go into a time of discussion now. So either discuss with your housemates or someone from CU that you know, or whoever invited you along this evening. Yeah, come up with some questions that you might have for Michael and Claire. If you haven't got friends you're watching it with or your housemates, then please join the Zoom link, which is in the chat, and then we'll be there and there'll be others there. We can come up with some questions as well and have a little talk about what we've heard. Yeah, we'd love to chat with you. Come
up with your questions.
Yeah, the questions that you're coming up with, there'll be a Slido link that's going into the chat now as well. And if you type them in there, then we'll come back a bit later and be asking them to Michael and Claire.
Yeah, so it's also the suku.uk/questions.
Yeah, so we hope you have some really great conversations and we'll see you back shortly.
Yeah.
Transition.
Welcome back. We hope you're having some really good discussions in your different groups.
Yeah. It's great to come up with some questions with you as well.
Yeah. We'll be inviting Michael and Claire back to join us now. And they'll be answering your questions. But please keep sending them into the Slido. The link's the same as before. And yeah, we'd love to get them to answer them with us.
For sure. Like, now's your time if you've got burning questions or just little questions that you want to ask, and do send them in so that Michael and Claire can answer them for you. But also there'll be more time to answer questions in the Zoom after. Yeah, welcome back, Michael and Claire.
Thanks for joining us again.
So the first one is, isn't it more important to change unjust structures than simply worry about trying to change people's hearts? Over to you guys.
I'll start, and then, is that okay? And then Claire, if you want to chip in. I guess tonight I was talking a lot about how Jesus can change our hearts and the problem that we find not just out in the world and other people, but in our hearts too, and how Jesus can address that. And I guess one of the accusations against that can be like, that's fine, like it's really good that Jesus might be able to change you, but it's not just people that cause injustice. There are whole structures in society that are unjust and perpetuate injustice. So shouldn't we be trying to tackle them? And I think often this debate then becomes like an either or debate, whereas actually I think it has to be a both and debate. You see, why are structures existing in the first place? They're existing because people have put them there. And so they're a reflection of the messed up human heart in our society. And so to say that the problem is merely in our structures is just too simplistic, isn't it? Structures don't just come out of nowhere. They come out of people and what people have thought. And even though societies might change, they might still exist and so on. So I would say it's not either or, it's both and. Structures exist because the human heart exists, and the human heart needs to change. But just trying to change the human heart and saying, well, that's fine, like we'll have this kind of like pietistic personal faith in Jesus that doesn't get involved in the world, like that's not fine. And that's why there are some wonderful examples of Christians through history who have, like I mentioned, just one, like John Newton, someone who is personally changed by this faith in Jesus, who then wants to see change to those structures that he once been a part of, but comes to see the evil of. So I would say it's not either or, it's both and we need to be driven to want to do that, but from a heart that's been changed. I wonder sometimes whether actually our desire to only change structures comes from a lack of belief that the human heart itself can be changed. And we want to say, actually, Jesus has the power to change hearts. And then he calls us to be agents of change that also change those structures too. Do you want to add something to that, Claire?
Yeah, just in brief, I'll just say that I think sometimes I think maybe the hesitance that people have about wanting to change structures as well as the human heart is not coming to terms with or not feeling comfortable with the fact that just because you haven't seen a system that has caused oppression or caused injustice before, or you're not aware of it, it doesn't mean that such a system or structure does not exist. And so I think one of the things we need to be doing particularly, and I think what the Christian worldview helps us to do, is it gives us the grace and the space to have very difficult conversations. And I think sometimes conversations are what's missing in this pursuit of justice, of a heart that's transformed, and also of structures that transform. So what I get from the Christian worldview is a space for grace. And that's not always easy for me to do. Sometimes I will be, quite angry or whatever might be the case. But actually, conversation is going to be helping us to change the system. And I think, as I keep saying, the Christian world gives us that grace to do so.
Yeah, that idea of grace for space for conversation is such a good one. We've had a question that's kind of linked to those structures that we were just talking about. And it says, why is Christianity, especially in America, so bad at being on the side of justice? E.g., overwhelming support from Christians for Trump.
I'm looking at you, Claire. Do you want to go for
that? Yes. Okay. I'll add a few thoughts and I'm sure Michael will jump in. Okay. So I I think the question is okay. There. I think what we need to do is step back from this question a little bit and kind of investigate some of the things that Michael was saying about the notion in our cancel culture, which is take a side and pick a side, and from which side you've picked, I know if you're a good person. But actually, the Christian worldview states that we're all not good. We're all capable of being kind, and we're all capable of, being very mean and horrible and mean and evil towards each other. That's what the Christian worldview says about the condition of the human heart. So perhaps this bit about being on the side of justice, I would just have some questions about, and I'm not saying here that I'm a Biden supporter or a Trump supporter. This is not what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to step back to say, does this idea of being on a side, is that helpful? Is it getting at the root of the problem, which, as Michael clearly explained, is the heart, which then the human heart then goes and creates systems of injustice? I think I'm breaking up here a little bit. I'm going to talk a bit more slowly. I'm so sorry, guys. Okay, great. So then I do think that there is a place to have a conversation about I would say ideas of nationalism, of Christian nationalism, and thinking about how perhaps unhelpful some of those ideas might be. But I think that's a huge conversation for another time. But I would say that because there are some Christians who will say that they support Trump because they believe that some of his policies were on the side of justice, and so we're just going round and round and round in circles, when actually taking a step back to think, do we need to have this kind of dichotomy of sides?
Yeah, Michael was saying,
Just one thing to add to that, just to say, one of the things I find helpful looking at the kind of political situation in the UK is, according to at least recent surveys, that the spread of the evangelical vote, if you want to call it, like the Christian vote in the UK, is actually quite evenly spread between the main parties. That's not always the case, especially in America. But I think that reflects the fact that actually there'll be aspects of the left and the right politically that Christians will identify with. But there'll also be aspects of certain political parties that Christians maybe won't agree with. The danger is it becomes seen that basically Christians align with one political opinion, as if everything that political opinion stands for is right, and everything that the opposition stands for is wrong. And what we're trying to say is actually, no, that's just not the case. If the dividing line between good and evil goes down the centre of every human heart, you can say it also goes down the centre of every political party and manifesto. There's stuff that we want to really endorse and affirm, and stuff that we would want to actually challenge. So I'd say standing for justice doesn't mean supporting left or right, Democrat, Republican. It means actually, in a sense, being more radical than that, and actually saying, is there a greater power that we can appeal to that can give us a sense of ultimate justice and and from which we can get our bearings in a very, very confusing world?
Yeah, some great answers there for that question. For our next question, why does God allow this injustice to happen?
Yeah, I'll kick us off. It's a very real question, isn't it? Because like when we look at our world, we were thinking last night about something, the pain and the brokenness of our world. It would be very easy to think, well, why doesn't God just step in? When we see some of the horrific injustices going on in our world. My wife's just reading a book at the moment about North Korea and the just the horrific injustice and evil going on in that nation. And you just think, like, if there was a God, why would he not step in? Why would he not intervene when people are causing such horrific pain, injustice, and evil? That's a very real question. I can understand where it comes from. I guess in one sense, one of my responses would be to say, okay, let's say he does. Let's say he steps into North Korea. Let's say he steps in to situations of injustice. Where does he stop? Like, okay, we're all kind of agreed that we could do with a few less dictators in the world. But actually the pain and the suffering and the injustice of our world isn't just caused by dictators, is it? Like, where does he stop? And I guess if we're really, really, really honest, like, we have to accept that sometimes I'm complicit in it myself. So if God's going to wipe out everything that causes injustice, pain, and evil in the world, what about me? What about the ways that I do that? And actually, as we said earlier, Jesus didn't come to rub in, but to rub out. He wants to actually do something greater. He wants to offer forgiveness and the possibility of change. I was just reading recently the story of an amazing guy I got to meet a couple of years ago. He was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. He was basically on the top 10 list of America's most wanted. He was an incredibly racist, evil man in America. Nearly killed twice when he was arrested. Amazingly survived. And then in prison encountered Jesus. And his life totally transformed. Now working for justice, for racial equality, totally changed. That's the kind of transformation that Jesus can do. And actually, he recognizes, I could have been snuffed out. I could have been dead. How gracious of God, he gave me that second chance. And we believe in a God who gives people second chances. There is going to be a day ultimately when justice will finally be done. But in the meantime, actually, God wants to give perpetrators of injustice, and that includes me, the opportunity to turn back to him.
Wow, that's some good responses there.
It's so amazing to hear the power of Jesus, that man knew him and then was changed and transformed.
Yeah, for sure.
We've got a bit of a different one in the Slido now, which you can keep on sending your questions into.
Yeah, and be voting for the ones liking them.
Upvoting the ones you want to hear the answers to. How do you know your interpretation of the Bible is correct? Hasn't it been used to justify slavery in the past?
I'll jump in here. This question is a very, very deep one, and it's one that I have wrestled with, and one that I talk to many Christians of colour about this as well. Just to say a couple of things, when we see slavery in the Bible, it's very important to understand the kind of historical context of what we're talking about here. So, for instance, in sort of Old Testament examples of slavery in the Bible, you'll see that, for instance, slaves might have property, might have land and possessions where they're actually a part of the household of their enslaver, if you will, and not kind of the examples of the horrors of the chattel slavery and the transatlantic slave trade that we see in the 17th century. So just to add a bit of nuance to that, I could explain some more. What I'll do is give you a New Testament example when we see references to slavery in the Bible, and one of a key passage is Philemon. The Apostle Paul is writing a letter to Philemon about a slave who's run away. And actually what Paul does is say to Philemon, and this letter, and let's note this letter would have been read in the middle of the church. So kind of Philemon would have been held to account because this letter would have been read aloud. So Paul is using some quite good rhetorical skill there. He writes and says, when I'm going to send the slave back to you, and when he comes back to you, greet him as a brother. Okay, and so that phrase, greet him as a brother, what Paul is doing there is breaking down the idea of the slave master sort of dynamic. He's saying that when someone becomes a Christian, those kinds of power differentials, they need to be dismantled. And so I find that to Philemon really quite a powerful explanation of what the gospel can do to some of these unjust systems that we have.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Greet him as a brother. And that's not the only time that we see that family greeting in the Bible. It's so powerful. Okay, another one here. Hasn't religion caused division?
Yeah, good question. And I guess you might be thinking, it's all very well trying to say that Jesus is the answer, but isn't Jesus part of the problem? Isn't religion part of the problem? I think there's two things I'd say. One is, firstly, we're not here to advocate for like religion in general. And actually, even to ask the question, well, what is religion anyway? Like, is it belief in God? Well, not all what we class as major world religions believing God. Yes, belief systems could be classed as religion, but then there are all sorts of belief systems. And yes, all belief systems can be used to bring about division and hostility, and we've seen examples of that. I guess what I want to say, though, is a consistent outworking of faith in Jesus causing division. Is that what we're talking about? Because yes, I look back at the history of the church, I look back at people who've claimed the name of Christ, and I can see how sometimes they have caused division. And it's interesting because Jesus himself said, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but those who do the will of my Father. So he says it's quite possible that people will claim the label Christianity, claim the label Jesus, but live in a way which is completely discordant, a complete antithesis of what Jesus was about. And here is Jesus coming saying, actually, love not just your neighbor, love your enemy, do good to those who persecute you.
Yeah.
And then doesn't just teach that, because it's easy to say one thing and live another way, but then practices what he preaches as he forgives the very people who are crucifying him, as he heals the soldier who's come to arrest him. Like, incredible displays of forgiveness. And I would say, what does it look like to live that out? What does it look like to live consistently with Jesus? And actually, think back to, as we mentioned earlier, someone like William Wilberforce and those that we were mentioning that were involved in opposing the slave trade. Yes, there were plenty of Christians 200 years ago who were complicit in and supportive of the slave trade. But the Christians who stood against it, what did they say? Did they say you need to be less Christian? Like, you need to let go of Jesus and then we can stand up against this evil? No, they didn't. They said, no, actually, your problem is not that you're being too Christian. You're not being Christian enough. You're not really understanding what it means to follow Jesus. You need to really embrace Christ. And then in embracing the true heart of what Christianity is about, we can oppose this. So I would say, yes, Christians can and sometimes have and sometimes do. But the question is not to be less Christian, but to be more consistently a follower of Christ and to look at what that means to live that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was such a good starting
resource as well.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to suggest a resource. Thank you, Michael, for that answer. I'm not going to add anything to that. I'll just say that really good resource to look at. And I was quite challenged by this book, is a book by Keith Ward, and it's called Is Religion Dangerous? And there's lots and lots of food for thought in that book.
Oh, thank you for that. And yeah, Michael, what you were talking about with like forgiveness and kind of all that stuff to do with that, we have a question which says, should those that experience racism have to forgive their oppressors?
Claire, do you want to go for that?
Yeah. This is again another tough question. We're not holding back tonight, are we? No, that's good. It's all good. I think that when we think about what forgiveness is, sometimes it can just be seen as, you kind of just roll over, let people walk all over you, and that's the end of it, and you're just weak. When actually, I can see I'm frozen again. Actually, forgiveness is a very, very costly thing. And part of the reason that I, as a Christian, know that forgiveness is a costly thing is because of what Jesus did on the cross. Okay. I've heard it put like this, that when somebody does something wrong to you, you almost pay twice for it. Once when they actually did the wrong, and then twice when they come to ask you for forgiveness. You are giving them a loan of grace, which they have not earned. Okay, and so I think for me, as a Black Christian, and some of the things I've seen and read about in history, and also what I've experienced in the present day, understanding that there is strength in my forgiveness, and kind of helps me reframe the thinking a bit better. I'm not just kind of allowing people to walk all over me. And I think also with forgiveness comes the person who is seeking forgiveness. I would also, and this is not always promised, but I would also expect to see a change in how they then treat me further on. And so there is a kind of a two-way agreement there. So not just not just the expectation to forgive and then constantly be oppressed, if I think that's the wording of the question, but actually is the oppressor, is the perpetrator, whoever, committed to changing their behavior, and especially in the light of the gospel. And that's what we kind of saw with Michael's talk there, and particularly his reference about John Newton there.
Yeah, just to really mention on the back of that, forgiveness needs to be offered, but it needs to be received. And to be received, in the Christian story, the Bible talks about the need for repentance, which is really just to say a complete change of direction, a realization that what we did was wrong, and a realization that we need to be forgiven. So forgiveness cannot be received without repentance. So what I would say is, the Bible says we are to be willing to offer forgiveness to anyone, but actually there is a two-way part to that. God doesn't forgive us unless we are willing to repent and respond to him. And so therefore he doesn't call us to do something that he hasn't done. He calls us to be willing to forgive, but there needs to be real repentance, because without that there can never be reconciliation. So this is it's what Claire said is just so helpful there. And sometimes this can be used oppressively, you see, like, you've got to forgive me, you're a Christian, like, and it's like, no, you need to repent. You're wrong, and then I'll forgive you.
Yeah, such good points. Thank you so much. We're actually going to go on to our last question now, but feel free to keep sending them in. Don't worry if your question hasn't been answered. We'd love to see you on the Zoom call afterwards. And Claire and Michael will both be there, so we'll be ready to answer your questions and we'd love to chat with you. But yeah, for our last question this evening, what role do Christians have in social justice? Shouldn't they be doing more?
I'll jump in with some thoughts about this. I think perhaps maybe this question comes from a sense that social justice in the minds of some Christians, or in the minds of some people, is almost antithetical to the Christian message, or isn't part of what Christianity is about. It's kind of this again, what Michael was saying so clearly in his talk about just deal with the heart. This idea of social justice is a way to just do charitable things and lead people away from the person of Jesus. But actually, I think, and I've seen in my life and in the lives of so many people, and also the examples that Michael gave, particularly around, I think, Tom Tarrant, is that his name? I think that when someone becomes a Christian, part of out of the overflow of God's grace, what God has done in their heart, they should then be actively involved in changing our world for the better, and whether that's social justice to do with racial reconciliation or whatever the case may be. And so I think I agree with part of the question, saying that Christians should be doing more, but having that held together with a heart that is transformed as well.
Michael, is there anything that you wanted to add? Or
I fully agree with Claire.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Guys, thank you so much for answering those questions. And like we were saying, if you do have any more questions that haven't been answered, please come and join us over on the Zoom afterwards. We'll answer the rest of the questions on the Slido, or just any other questions you might have. But if this evening's brought up some bigger questions for you, we'd love to tell you about the Just Looking course.
Yeah, so the Just Looking course, it's starting on the 11th of February, and it will run for 6 sessions on Thursday evenings on Zoom. And it's a very friendly, non-judgmental environment where you can just ask your questions and learn some more.
Yeah, so if you're just looking at the Christian faith, or you just want to find out a little bit more, we think you'd love the Just Looking course. Or if you have maybe a bit of a shorter question, there's another opportunity for you to ask that, and that's through Text a Treat. So if you don't know what Text a Treat is, it's just an opportunity for you to ask any of your questions about Christianity. So yeah, you can message those in. We have a Facebook and an Instagram page, and we'll record an answer for you. And then along with that answer, you get a sweet treat. And if you're in Southampton, we'd love to deliver that to you in person. If you're still back home, or maybe you're not from Southampton Uni this evening, we'd still love to answer your question, and we'll actually post your treat out to you.
So amazing.
Yeah, we would so love to hear from you guys.
And there's also the international talk. Is that at 1?
Yeah, the international talk tomorrow at 1. And hopefully you've seen Michael's been putting out these amazing videos in the morning, which will just get your head in the right place. So you know a little bit more about what we're talking about in the evening and just the theme for the day.
Yeah. So do you carry on having conversations with your friends, and you can be thinking of who you can be inviting along to tomorrow's evening talk?
Yeah, tomorrow we're having a conversation for the hard worker. And then on Friday, we'll be talking about is there life after death, and what happens after we die. We'd love to have you guys with us.
For sure. So keep thinking of those questions that you might have for the next talks. But yeah, let's just keep the conversation going. It definitely doesn't have to stop once the live stream stops.
Yeah, and like we've said before, we'd love to see you on Zoom and keep that conversation going with us. It's been such a pleasure to have you guys with us this evening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much to Michael and Claire for all your inputs, all your wisdom, and just all your encouragements as well.
For sure. There's definitely been lots of stuff that I've taken away. I've been writing my notes. So that's another thing. If you haven't got the goodie bags, you get a nice little notebook in there. So do sign up for those if you haven't got one yet, and we'll be able to get one to you.
I also so enjoyed doing my crossword yesterday. That's a lot of fun.
It's a good one.
But yeah, thanks for joining us this evening, and hopefully see you soon.
And see you later on the Zoom.
As part of the big conversation at Southampton University, we've been asking the big questions about life. We'd like to invite you to continue the conversation as we ask big questions of the Christian faith, such as, who is Jesus? How has Christianity impacted the world? In our broken world, what is the solution? Why does Jesus have any relevance in 2021? Join us at 7 p.m. on Thursday evenings, starting on the 11th of February, for this exciting opportunity to ask questions alongside community. The course is 6 weeks long, and you can find all the details on how to get involved at suku.uk/just-looking. We'd love to see you there.